So I'm Christine Anderson. I'm a member of EU Parliament, and I was elected in July of 2019, and I'm serving in the EU Parliament, the German people, and I try to represent their interests and fight for their freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. The EU Parliament is not the legislation. They do not pass laws. It's actually done in the Council of the European Union. And there you have it. Division of power is basically no longer a thing, as you might say.
Is that the Council of Europe?
Exactly. Okay. So it's comprised of the, like I said, the members of the national governments. So whatever they cannot do in their own parliament, because national parliaments do have a tendency of still controlling government, they just move it over to EU, it gets passed there, and then it goes back to the member states, and they will have to implement it since it was, passed on EU level. So another example, look at the EU Parliament. It is no parliament at all. I mean, we have no, classical rights like, to initiate laws. We don't control any budget. There is no government really that we can control. I mean, there is the Commission, but we do not have the capacity or the competence to control them. The only thing we can really do is to ask them questions or to put in petitions or resolutions if you want, and ask them to do certain things, but they don't have to comply with that. They can do whatever they want, basically. There are no debates in the EU Parliament. No one really cares. MEPs just go there to hold their speech, speak in the camera, which they then put on their social media, but there is like no back and forth of arguments, so that the MEPs might, come to a certain conclusion, which might then determine their voting behavior. None of this is happening. So
did that surprise you when you saw that? Or?
Well, to the extent it's done in EU Parliament, yeah, because this is so far beyond anything what I would consider democracy. It's a democracy illusion. It's a theater. It's a farce. It's a big farce, and the taxpayers. I mean, they pay so much money for these MEPs to basically do nothing but look good. And most of the time, they're not even doing that. But once again, do not make the mistake of thinking that, like it's done in the United States. So it's not like a back and forth, where each senator gets a certain amount of time and he just, can fire up his questions. It's like they're holding some kind of a speech, and then each group, the representative of each group, gets to ask a question, which is then collected, and then the commissioner gets, time to answer the questions. But of course, she will pick the questions she will answer,
Right.
So
it is free question?
There is not, absolutely not. Right. So, and if time is up for her to answer, then, and your question wasn't answered, guess what? You never get an answer. Mm. So, and then the second round, they have some more MEPs capable of answering question, and they do the same thing over again. So, but 9 times out of 10, the questions you ask, they never get answered. So, in my case, more times than not, once I'm done asking my question, I get admonished, for how can you ask this question? So, instead of answering my question, they basically lecture me on how I should not be asking questions like this, for instance. So, I think it's pretty fair to say that most people in government nowadays, or in high positions of government, they're puppets. And they may not even be aware of the full scheme of things, They may only know little bits here and there, but the machinery is working. They all want to keep their positions. They don't want to, threaten their livelihood, their income. So most of them just shut up about it. They don't say anything. They don't challenge anything.
Yeah.
So what people, or how people think, politics works, and if they actually knew how it did work, they would just run from it. In the committees, which is supposed to be the place where we do all the work, really get down to it. No, it's a farce too. You may ask a question or whatever, but either it's not really answered, or the agenda is set, and the function of most MEPs is simply to sit there, vote for it, and be done with it. They might ask a couple of questions, even some critical, but this is just to keep up appearances. It's nothing else. No, it's not. COVID, it was just another puzzle. They utilized a crisis, if you will. They utilized, to push their agenda. It started way back. Take the euro crisis, which actually started with a subprime crisis in the United States. So it kind of came over here, now we're at the euro crisis. So if you look at the euro itself, it's not working. It could have never worked, because you cannot take a currency and put it into different economies where there is no basic foundation on legislation, on work laws, on social laws, the whole thing. It cannot work. I mean, what we're seeing now, lifting the restrictions and all of that, it's a tactical retreat, to give people a breather, if you will, and maybe they will, be thankful to the government that, after all, we got our freedom back, But in fall, when the respiratory, disease comes again, which it does every year, it will start all over again. And take the COVID pass, for instance. That was just a test balloon to see if people, would adhere to it, obey, and to get people used to the fact to present something, So no, you cannot just simply walk into a store. You have to produce something, a QR code or whatever it was. So
what's the status of that? The EU president said that the 19 member states are going to introduce this in July, right, or August? Or?
Well, no, that was actually a video of last year when we did vote on the digital green certificate, and it was implemented of last year, July 1st of last year. What they did do, however, by the way, it was implemented to facilitate travel within the member states, so they wouldn't all have different rules, who can come in, stuff like that, which actually made kind of sense. But I looked at it and said, you do not only look at what they're telling you it will do, you look at what it could do and what they will do, So, and it was pretty clear, it's not just to facilitate travel within the member states. They will abuse it, and I called it a coupon ration for fundamental rights, So, and that's another thing we saw. Fundamental rights, they're now privileges, that governments can grant or withhold. Oh, this is new, When did that happen? Well, it happened, along those lines. Well, the most important thing people need to understand is our democracy, our freedom, and the rule of law, they are under attack. And governments, basically will not stop until they achieve their goals. When you look at, for instance, in Bologna in Italy, they will start a pilot project starting this fall, and I call it Smart Citizen Wallet. And it's basically the Chinese social credit system light,
This is for the province of Bologna?
Right, it's just a pilot project. They will test it, So, of course, it's absolutely voluntary for now. So people get citizens get rewarded, for appropriate behavior, So let's say they might come up with, you know, something. Well, if you ride the bus and you actually do buy a ticket, you know, you get a reward, you get a bonus, you know. So, okay, that's kind of fine. But what about, you know, well, we will put in this thing in your car to, you know, measure how fast you're going. And if you never exceed a certain amount of speed, you know, you get a reward. And the next step might be, you know, well, if you do exceed, we will deduct, you know, punish you somehow. So this is basically the Chinese social credit system. And interestingly enough, they're doing the same thing in Vienna. In Vienna, it's called Vienna token. So it is, yeah, it is voluntary, you know, for now. But we all know whatever they introduce as voluntary measures, it never does stay voluntary. So they will build on this. And the next thing they're pushing is EU ID, a digital identity, you know. So this is why I said the COVID pass, it was just a test balloon to get people used to presenting something. You know, now it's just a small step. Oh, well, what's the big deal? So I have a digital ID now. And when von der Leyen introduced that, she was, you know, talking about we should not trust big governments with our data like Google and Apple. And I was like, yeah, she's right about that. But then she went on. We should, you know, trust our data, or we should entrust our data to people we trust. And she points at herself. And I'm like, well, I don't trust you either. I'm not trusting you in my data either. But, you know, this is like, so it's like this, they're saying, well, if you give all of your data to us, you know, we'll take care of it and we'll make sure it's, you know, it's not being abused. Yeah. But the point is, you know, and then of course we were promised that all of the data stored on it, we have full control over it. We can say this data goes on and this, yeah, right, really? Yeah, I'm not buying that for a second. Well, what we need to do is we need to raise awareness among the people. We need to get people to understand, no, the government is not your friend. They tell you they are, but they are not. They have a complete different agenda, and it's not what you would need or what you would want. It doesn't even have anything to do with any of your best interests or whatever. This is completely aside from that. So they need to be aware of the fact that, yeah, the government is not looking out for our best interest, and they will do whatever to take control or to get the control of the people. Because from their perspective, democracy is a nuisance. It's bothered them, you know. You have to explain things to people, you know, and you kind of have to get them in line with it, you know, get approval. Oh, this is really annoying, you know, from their perspective. And they're trying to cut down on that. They no longer want to be controlled. They no longer want to be held accountable. They just, you know, want to do whatever the hell they want to do without the interference of the people. And then where it comes in, I mean, look at the way citizens are treated by governments. Not as responsible citizens who are in charge of policy making, of decision making. They're being treated like naughty children, you know, that need to be sent off to bed with no supper, you know. And that's how they're being treated. And citizens that do stand up and say, well, I don't agree with this, you know, they're being called names. And I think there's more chance of people they are waking up in the Eastern European countries, because they still remember what it was like to be in a dictatorship. They recognize the mechanisms, they see the signs, and they still know what it felt like to have no rights, to be controlled by the police, the state police. They remember all of this, and they recognize the same is happening over again. But in the Western democracies, you know, we're spoiled brats, basically, you know. I mean, freedom, democracy, rule of it was handed down to us, you know, it came from somewhere. But for most Westerners, it was like, you know, well, I came from somewhere. We no longer remember, no, that had to be fought for. It had to be wrestled from the elites. And our fathers and forefathers spilled their blood over it, so we can live and enjoy freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. But people have forgotten, apparently. You know, and something that you did not have to work for, that was just given to you, you know, you do not necessarily recognize its value. But it is so precious, and we have to do everything to uphold and defend it. Well, they need to be aware of what's happening. Don't trust the government. Be alert, question it, write to your elected representatives, let them know what you will and will not tolerate, and let them know that you know something is up, and that their job is to represent you, and make it clear to them that you are their boss and that you get to tell them what they have to do. And anyone, any elected representative not willing to do what the people want can no longer count on getting reelected. It's as simple as that.